Volume. Thank you for coming out. Hello. Sorry for, we'll apologize for Scott there for pushing over, but to offset that, we're going to do Scott's car giveaway right now. Because I have a question that we're going to give three of you a chance, right? So let's, the question is, Scott talked about large mailboxes in the earlier session, and so I need a spotter. Can one of you guys help kind of spot? It's hard to see with the lights in the front, right? Who raises, who are the lucky three folks that get to take a guess at the question? Scott talked about larger mailboxes, and when we've talked about larger mailboxes now for about 10 years. We talked first, it was 2 gigs as a large mailbox size, and 5 gigs, and 10 gigs, and we keep increasing the size. Scott mentioned some numbers in his presentation. And so we have one, I see a hand over here, you got a couple? All right, so you're tracking it? So of the 3 people, we're going to play what we call Price is Right rules. The closest to the largest size without going over. What is the largest size mailbox we have seen in production at Microsoft from both customers and our internal service levels? You didn't mention it, right? That's why we're going to play Price is Right rules to see how. So if you're not aware, Price is Right rules. Of the 3 people, the person that comes closest to the largest size without going over will win the car. So who had, you said you saw someone raise first? Let's, what's your guess? So Scott mentioned we're testing at 100 gig. I'll give you one more chance to revise your, largest obviously would go beyond the testing range, right? So he mentioned 100 gig as our test pattern now, but obviously we've seen much larger than that. So we'll give you a second chance on that as a 400 gig. So our first question response is 400 gig. Anyone want to go? Who's next on the? All right, gentleman in the black, who's still has his hand up. Pardon? 250. So we have 400, 250. Who's next, Lohit? Yeah, right. Well, that's a good. It could be 300, right? So, gentleman in the blue. Which gentleman in the blue? Right here, front? 700. So we have 3 guesses. We're not actually that close to the actual number yet, so that's a pretty wide range. We'll give one more chance. One more chance. All right, who's our? There we go. The answer is 1.1 terabytes. So, for the chance wins the Price is Right rules for the RC call. Yeah, so we had a mailbox actually in the service that we had some issues moving a mailbox. The operations team reported that we had issues with the mailbox move, escalated the issue up to the mailbox move team. Mailbox move team started looking at the logs, trying to figure out what the issue was with the code with mailbox moves going to 2013 from 2010. And notice that there was a drive space issue on the target volume. The mailbox, there was no issue with the mailbox move code. There just wasn't enough drive space on the target database to handle a 1.1 terabyte mailbox. So we are supported size, as Scott said, right? We're testing up to 100 gig, but we do see some very large mailboxes. It's not uncommon for us to see them in the several hundred gigabyte range. And the largest now that we've seen is at over a terabyte now. So we do see some very large mailboxes out there. With that, we'll move on to the EXL 308 Lync 2013 architecture session. My name is Andrew Aronson. I presented here for the past couple of years around the Lync track. You all got, how many of you saw Paul Dolly's session this morning kind of announcing the highlights to changes for Lync 2013 preview? So this is, as we point out, right, this content is still in draft format. This is the first time this is being publicly seen. There's actually a parallel Lync Ignite event going on this week in Barcelona. So between Barcelona and Auckland, New Zealand, you are the first non-Microsoft employees who are not part of the TAMPRA RDP program to see this information. And so our preface, right, is that the information obviously is subject to change. We could make changes between now and when we release the software, so please keep that in mind. But we're trying to give you the most up-to-date and relevant content possible. Paul actually had an hour and a half before his session, he was authorized to disclose even more information than we were authorized to disclose yesterday. So this is really kind of a moving target. We have been updating the slides as that comes through, and we're trying to give you the closest to real-time information that we have around the products that are coming for release later this year. So first one, right, is this concept of Lync itself. The Microsoft philosophy around Lync is really it's our real-time communications product. So if you're looking at things such as where a real-time response or a real-time communication style is needed, so instant messaging or voice or video or sharing some content, that umbrella encompasses the Lync product. Our asynchronous communication platform is Exchange, and our collaboration tool is SharePoint. And the goal really with this wave of products is to do a tighter level of integration between all of these three. Historically, they were relatively separate products. We tried to keep the same look and feel, same management infrastructure, right, around things like PowerShell and the management consoles, for example. But with this wave, we're really trying to tie those three together into something that we call dynamic workplace. And so that gives you the capability to have a collaboration platform that happens to have some real-time and some asynchronous communications modalities, as well as for the first time, some ability to leverage other parts of those components as one product, right? So you have a compliance engine and other pieces that will be the same across these products themselves. Obviously, all of these products will sit on top of Active Directory. We've had great success over the past 13 years now, deploying and leveraging and supporting the Active Directory product. That typically is the backbone of most organizations' identity and authentication and authorization service. All Microsoft products will leverage that as their preferred directory, anything from the Exchange global address list all the way to the Lync contact card information, for example, will flow from that single directory infrastructure. We won't have separate identity or authorization systems in our products. We'll always pull that from your centralized Active Directory environment. Also with Lync, the goal is really to help increase the IT efficiency. We'll spend a couple slides talking about the operational and manageability changes inside of Lync 2013 preview that help make it an effective communications tool that you can deploy inside of your organization. And finally, one of the other major themes for our 2013 preview or 2013 release of products is the goal of enabling you to have choice in how you deploy. And that choice could be a full on-prem system, it could be a full cloud system, and really, for the first time now, a really good choice around a hybrid story where you can have some users online and some in the cloud. And so by giving you this choice, we feel you are the ones best able to make a decision or a choice in that manner of what is the preferred deployment method that you'll use for these products. And so with that, we start out actually talking about those deployment options, right? And so the first one, or the one that encompasses all of the Lync modalities or functionality, is Lync Server on-premise, or Lync Server, as actually we call it. The Lync Server on-premise is the one that includes the most functionality from an end-user perspective. We don't block anything effectively from you. And the reality there is with Lync, we have some nuances around communications that we don't have in the other products. Voice, for example, is a protocol that's very sensitive to things such as latency and bandwidth, for example, as well as tie-in points or integration points with the public switch telephone network or PSTN. And so when it comes to our full set of voice features and voice capabilities, we require some on-premise infrastructure, even if you have, for example, the cloud option. With Lync Server on-prem, you have all of those choices available to you. You are not restricted in using things such as response groups or call admission control or some of the other advanced Lync voice protocols or Lync voice features. The interoperability story has improved. As we said, as part of the dynamic workplace, we're really trying to bring some cohesion across the three product groups or our back-end product story. And at the same time, we give you the choice to deploy Lync on-prem, even if your Exchange or SharePoint infrastructure is in the cloud. And so if you have Exchange Online, for example, you can use Exchange Unified Messaging. However, your Lync environment could still remain on-prem and give you access to that voicemail platform that resides off in Office 365. Additionally, right, there's the deployment option of Lync Online. So Lync Online is our Office 365 platform for this. The difference here is we're giving you a service level assurance, right? And so a financially backed SLA. We're going to manage the complexity of running and operating it. We'll give you a subset of what you would deploy on premises, but in return, you have a easier manageability and operation story. You're not required to deploy the servers yourself, to manage them, to patch them, to upgrade them, for example. We will take care of that on the back end as part of Office 365. So the reduced administration is typically where we see customers adopt or go to the online capabilities. Finally, there's the hybrid option. So hybrid is our choice that says, we've heard customers say, well, I like to test out the online waters. I'm not necessarily sure I want to move my entire organization to an online or hosted environment, but I'd like to evaluate it. Or there's a subset of users in my organization, maybe in a different subsidiary or a different continent, for example, that I'd like to enable rapidly, but I don't want to place resources in that location or that subsidiary. And so I want to turn them on or light them up online, but I still want them to be able to communicate and operate with the people who I have hosted on-prem in my existing infrastructure. And so there's been a significant amount of effort towards this hybrid scenario where we now allow you to basically split your user population and have both an on-premise component and an online component for your users. Let me get some water. The next half hour to 40 minutes, we're really going to focus on the core architectural changes inside of Lync 2013 preview. So across Lync 2013, 2013 preview, one of the main stories or areas of investment is the concept of trying to unify and bring together the different components. For example, persistent chat and mobile were features that we've kind of added over the last couple of years. Mobile very recently, persistent chat 2 or 3 years back. We used to call it group chat, for example, if you're not familiar with the phrase persistent chat. But those components had a different management infrastructure, a different setup process, for example, a different deployment process. With Lync 2013 preview, we unify that experience. So the Lync 2013 client now allows you to do both the IM that you're used to, as well as be a front end to our persistent chat infrastructure. You're no longer required to deploy a separate client to manage persistent, for users who use persistent chat, and one client for users who use the IM presence, audio, and video functionality. For enterprise voice, we've also made some substantial investments. We'll walk you through the capabilities of both feature changes, as well as stories around our availability and site resilience capabilities. With enterprise voice in Lync 2010, we had the capability of providing high availability and site resilience and having some pool-level failover. But we found that a lot of customers were asking for that same capability around instant messaging and conferencing. And with Lync 2013, we're happy to announce that that automatic failover capability now extends beyond enterprise voice into that IM and conferencing capabilities. We had some organizations deploy some custom scripts in order to accommodate this back in the Lync 2010 timeline. Now we've built that into the product, so it's an automatic in terms of a feature set or capability. So let's take a look at some of the enterprise voice or our telephony features that have changed inside of Lync 2013 preview. First of all, we had some concepts around response groups where, as a response group, only a Lync administrator really was the one authorized to create or sponsor changes to the response group hierarchy, call flow, agents, for example, and agent groups. We now have the concept, or an extended concept, in terms of the response groups of a response group administrator. And so you can delegate out, using RBAC, the capability to manage, maintain, and operate the response group hierarchy to someone actually in that business unit who has more of a feel for how the agents and groups should be configured, what those call flows are, and other attributes like that. With Lync 2010, we changed from OCSR2 and added the capability to have more than one gateway associated per mediation server to enable some redundancy in case a gateway or network connection went down between a mediation server and your outbound routing path or pattern. However, we didn't have the capability for a gateway to point to more than one mediation server inside. With Lync 2013, we now have extended this capability to say we have a M-to-N relationship, right? So you can have any number of mediation servers correlated to any number of gateways and vice versa. So we're no longer limited to a multiple mediation servers, or one mediation server to multiple gateways, one mediation server to gateway, for example. You can kind of use any combination of those to provide additional resilience and redundancy. Not only do we allow that concept of more than one path for inbound and outbound call flow, but we've also tuned the code that helps detect when one of those links or paths is down. With Lync 2010, we could see some delays sometimes up to 30 or 45 seconds, where you might have a path being down, but that path not being marked down in outbound routing. So in Lync 2013 preview, we've made some additional changes essentially to enhance that down logic or capability to detect a down link and ensure that that link then is not used for further calls until that capability is restored or brought back. Additionally, for the first time, Lync can now be used as a session manager, meaning we can do inter-trunk routing and route calls through your Lync environment. In the past, Lync was typically an endpoint or one of the destination paths, right, for inbound call logic. It was not something you would route calls through in your organization to get to another PBX or IPT or other type of telephony system. Now you have the choice of having that additional paths or allowing session management essentially to allow those calls to flow through. We'll go into a lot more detail on both the M2N gateway and the inter-trunk routing in the voice session tomorrow afternoon. We go into a lot more depth. Basically, this slide is a summary of the 40 to 50 slides or so that we talk about tomorrow afternoon. So if you have lots of technical questions, come by tomorrow and you'll see more detail around some of these capabilities for voice. We did announce last few months the concept of our beginnings of voice in the cloud, and so we have the concept of allowing IP phones and Lync to phone for Office 365. That will continue for Lync 2013 preview. There are some nuances and requirements around that, or some limitations as well, as we'll cover in the afternoon. But if you have a smaller or essentially a simpler deployment path where you don't require some of the advanced voice features, you're able to actually sign up now with the cloud and turn on phones on people's desks to give them that traditional handset infrastructure they may be used to. Additionally, there was some feedback that we had around delegates. A lot of people asked for more robust delegate support and so more robust delegate troubleshooting capabilities. And so significant amount of effort went into optimizing this delegate experience and ensuring that you have the tools and the capabilities to kind of match what you might see in a traditional admin assistant scenario that you have on the ground today with an existing PBX or phone system. Video conferencing, you saw quite a little bit about this morning. Paul alluded to the concept of multi-party video. This was one of the limitations in Lync 2010. We could do active speaker switching, for example, but we didn't have the capability to show multiple independent video streams. What we found is that this tended to limit the use of video in an organization. With multi-party video, as a manager or someone hosting the call, you have much more capability of seeing the participation of people in the online meeting. And so today you'll often have an online meeting with some content being shared out, maybe an IM session and probably an audio bridge that's up. But it's hard to tell if the people are actively engaged or if they're going through mail or browsing the web as you kind of go on and on about your content. With multi-party video, you'll see those streams coming inbound, right? And you're actually able to see, are people actively participating or are they not even at the desk, for example, and have walked off to look out the window or do something else while you're having your meeting. We have support still for up to 250 user conferences. We have a little caveat on that. We do still support the concept of 1,000 person conferences. About 6 months ago, we released a white paper describing how to do that with Lync 2010. The guidance of how to have that large conference support still applies for Lync 2013 preview, and we'll have more refined guidance around that as we get closer to RTM. So our support statement for a default pool without the customizations mentioned in the white paper is 250. Our support stance, when you follow the guidance in the white paper, is up to 1,000. With the concept of multi-party video, you have the option of locking or pinning a specific contact or a video screen window of one of the users in the call, or allowing Lync to kind of determine who's the large one and who are the small ones that you see. So in the example, right, we'll show you 5 multi-party video streams, But if you had 20 people in the call, we'll show the other ones as static shots underneath. If you want to drag or drop or force the 5 to be 5 specific people, you'll have that option. We also spend some time with Microsoft Research to try to optimize the codec, or technically the display of the video, to ensure that the person's head is always centered in the screen. So even if their webcam is displaying, kind of the head to the side or up or down, what you see in multi-party video is always kind of that centered head. So the video, the 5 streams that are inbound should show you the most of a person's face and facial expressions as you might be looking for. And finally, the most relevant one, we think, is the change of, or the support model now for video codecs. If we go back in time, like 5-7 years ago, Microsoft made a philosophical choice with Lync to determine, should we use existing codecs and then require a certain amount of network capacity and maybe reservations and quality of service, or should we make the assumption that networking speeds, bandwidth, and latency maybe not latency, networking bandwidth and will continue to grow over time, and let's assume that that will take place. So let's put some intelligence into the codec itself to deal with a degraded network or a non-optimal network experience. 8 to 10 years ago, this was vastly different from the traditional codecs that were on the marketplace. Most of them came from a TDM or the concept of TDM folks who expect kind of a guaranteed network path and a guaranteed amount of bandwidth and availability on that path with a certain amount of packet loss. Our approach was to say that the bandwidth and packet loss will change over time, and let's have the codec dynamically adjust during a call to do that. And so we invested a lot of money coming up with codecs, both for audio and for video, which managed to work in a non-perfect network scenario. Now, later on in time, we're seeing some of the codecs actually take that model as well. One of these in particular is H.264 SVC, or Scalable Video Codec. There's several advantages to H.264 SVC. One of them is this concept of scalable video codec. We can send out from our Lync audio-video conferencing server role different bandwidth rates to different clients without actually changing the codec or changing anything using the processor on that AV MCU, or essentially your Intel chipset on that server. As a result, we're able to dynamically adjust for different bandwidth connections without having to modify or change a codec. So we can still send an HD stream out for everyone or a VGA stream out for everyone, for example, but we'll adjust the frame rate on a per-client basis so that we don't overload the network or potentially have a degraded video experience for some of the people in the call. So we see the industry codecs changing or coming up with the same concept of having this scalable or dynamic codec capability. The second big advantage of H.264 SVC is that nearly all mobile phones and tablets have a hardware encoding and decoding chipset that supports H.264. And so if we use H.264, that means we don't have to use the processor on the mobile device. We can actually offload that to the circuits that are on the device itself, and then use and not require a high-end processor to do higher quality video. And so adoption of H.264 has a couple of advantages, right? The first is we have that reduced load on our CPU infrastructure. The second is that we're able to optimize the video experience on mobile platforms. So coming later, right, as Paul mentioned, is we will be adding full audio and video capabilities to our mobile platforms and those to our mobile client, our Lync mobile client. And that Lync mobile client will be released for all of the major smartphone or tablet operating systems. So Windows Phone 7, Windows Phone 8, as well as Windows 8, as well as iOS, as well as Android. Web conferencing is another area where we've made some changes. With OCS and with Lync 2010, we used to have a rendering engine for uploading PowerPoint and sending out PowerPoint using a protocol called PSOM to enable people to see what was being presented. Unfortunately, this was a codec that is several years old, right, and didn't allow us to do some of the things that happen in PowerPoint presentations today. Some of the animations may not have come through as optimally as we liked, and we had issues showing or exposing embedded audio or video inside of the presentation itself. This is the first time in this session, and we'll hit several points, right, where this concept will come up, where rather than the Lync team investing some effort to optimize or change that, we looked at a sister member of the back office or the dynamic workplace family, the SharePoint group, which has an Office web app server, and specifically a server role called the WAC server role, right? So the web application components. The WAC server role has a PowerPoint rendering engine developed by the PowerPoint team. It supports all the capabilities for PowerPoint streaming, including audio and video. And so with Lync 2013 Preview, we have the option now to enable or to point to a WAC server or WAC farm, potentially, depending on the scale, and have that full-fledged or full-fidelity PowerPoint experience streaming back to all users in that session. The other advantage to that WAC server role is it doesn't require a full client. We can do this in any browser that's supported. So as long as we have a supported browser, we're able to get that full fidelity PowerPoint or meeting streaming experience from that WAC server role as part of our web conference. One other, and this one I almost forgot to mention because it was off limits as of yesterday and on for today, which is that we now can do scheduling of meetings via OA as well as Outlook. So prior, with Lync 2010, for example, to schedule a meeting, you needed to have the Outlook add-in installed. You can click on Lync Meeting. You get the scheduling options, the link URLs. With OA 2013 and Lync 2013, you'll be able to do the scheduling for Lync meetings from a full browser client as well, and we no longer require the thick client for that scheduling experience. With Lync 2010, we had our first kind of real focus on mobile. We've had some mobile clients in the past for Office Communication Server, for example. We had some third-party vendors write some clients for both OCS and for Lync. But with Lync, we realized that mobile devices are becoming a prevalent part of the workforce. As a result, we focused on developing Lync clients from Microsoft for iOS, for Android, and for Windows Phone 7, and ensuring that that look and feel of those clients is consistent, or the interface is the same, right? So as users change vendors or devices, maybe they have a tablet with one version of an operating system and a phone with a different version of the operating system, their Lync experience becomes consistent. And so they know when they join a Lync call or when they have a Lync experience up, they'll have that same process or that same user experience. With 2010, that was limited to IM and presence and some things we call one-click meeting join, for example, and dial via work. With Lync 2013 Preview, with Lync 2013, we are extending that capability to include audio and video, including audio over 3G as well as Wi-Fi. And so that will be something that will be coming post-RTM as an FYI, but we are adding the capability around mobile clients to ensure that the mobile experience is as close to the desktop experience for as many users as possible. That being said, we also know from a previous one that our web conferencing support and our meeting join capabilities can be handled now not just via the Lync attendee console, but via a browser. That means that we do have the capability on tablet devices to join and see that meeting experience, including PowerPoint presentations, for example, or desktop sharing in that browser window on tablet devices, for example, as well. Finally, the other change with Lync 2013 around mobility is that we've unified the management and the operational aspect of deploying and managing your mobile infrastructure into Topology Builder, the Lync Server Control Panel, and PowerShell, which are the tools you use today. We've also ensured that the mobile components run on the front-end server as part of our drive to further consolidate services and roles to reduce the concept of server sprawl or number of physical servers or virtual servers that you might need to deploy. The last one is around persistent chat. So with persistent chat, like we said in the past, this was a separate client. Persistent chat or group chat came from our Parlano acquisition about 4 or 5 years back. And we've each release or each iteration of Lync, we've moved closer and closer towards a fully integrated model. With Lync 2013, you'll have the same client. We still have a separate back-end pool environment required for persistent chat. It's not the same back-end infrastructure you'll have on your primary instant messaging, conferencing, and AV pool, but the client experience is now the same. And we expect with a single client, we will see more of an adoption of things like persistent chat compared to the kind of rabid fans of persistent chat that we had, or group chat, that have it deployed today or have it deployed in an existing scenario. Additionally, we've taken the concepts in Lync 2010 or Lync 2013 around high availability and disaster recovery, and the Lync Server Control Panel and Lync Server Topology Builder, and brought those into the persistent chat realm. And so now persistent chat looks and operates like a traditional Lync server role. It just happens to be a different Lync server on the back end itself. One more change for persistent chat, I almost forgot, is that now that persistent chat and Lync use the same client, we also now can get to persistent chat from outside the network through an edge server. Previously, you required to VPN in, for example, to join a persistent chat session. So let's talk a little bit more about the maintenance and operational aspects. The first one is that we still have the concept of Lync server in both a standard edition and enterprise edition flavors. Standard edition has all the functionality with the limitation of one server per pool. Enterprise edition has the same functionality with the change of multiple servers per pool. With the concept of standard edition, we have the capability, right, for all functionality. With Lync Server 2013 Preview, you also have the capability of doing kind of a simple HA or site resilience by deploying 2 standard edition servers. We've introduced some changes in the HA story, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but effectively allows you to have users split up between 2 different pools and have those pools provide services for each other in the case of one of those pools failing. And we support that concept for both standard edition and for enterprise edition. So with 2 standard edition servers, you can have a full failover experience for instant messaging and presence, conferencing, and the core enterprise voice workloads. Standard edition servers as well scale up, right? We still have the support guidance today around 5,000 users. And just one caveat, right? All of our scalability guidance is subject to change. We're kind of going through that testing and analysis now. And so it may take us, it may change by the time we finally get to RTM. But our goal, and from what we see today, is it looks like it will be the same as prior releases of Lync. For Enterprise Edition, we've enhanced the scalability significantly. First of all, we used to be limited to approximately 8 or 10 servers in Lync 2010 per Enterprise Edition pool. We're looking at moving that to around 12 to 20 servers per pool with Lync 2013. That's a significant change in terms of how many users can be supported. And so for some of our larger scale customers, we're now able to scale up to potentially 200,000 active users per pool with over 1 million users provisioned per pool. We do have some that are both in Office 365 as well as some larger customers worldwide where these pool limits were actually one of the bottlenecks and determined carving out additional pool infrastructure. So Enterprise Edition now has additional scalability. Additionally, beyond that, we've done a lot of work to move yet more of the processing from the SQL backend to the front ends themselves. One of our limiting factors in the number of servers per pool was the SQL backend in Lync 2010 and prior. With Lync Server 2013, we actually offload all of the dynamic data or data that changes in real time to the front-end servers themselves. So things such as your presence status, right, that's going to change and is not something that needs to be stored forever in the database, now is handled on the front ends, no longer handled on the back ends, and that allows us essentially to scale out the model significantly and reduce the load that we had going to SQL. SQL is still used for data that needs to be persistent, such as your buddy list, your call forwarding rules, right, or things that you would expect to be there in case of a failure or outage that might have occurred. Flexibility, like we said, right, our goal here is also to increase your flexibility of deployment options. With Lync 2010 and prior versions, if we had more than one pool, we strongly recommended that a director be deployed because there were some technical things that happen during sign-in, such as your primary pool and your secondary pool, for example, that you would only get from talking to a director as your first point of entry to the organization. With Lync Server 2013, we've ensured that any front-end pool can handle that additional steps that a director used to. As a result, the director really becomes an optional role now. It's no longer one that we have to recommend in that multiple pool scenario. So first of all, one reduction around that type of server or number of server roles that need to be deployed. Second of all, we've done things such as combine, for example, the AV conferencing server role with the front-end server role and not even provide the choice to break that out. Our rationale there is that when we looked back at OCS 2007 R1 and R2, 4 cores was a large server. And when we talk about audio and video and web conferencing, for example, we have a lot of processor and essentially CPU requirements for processing that bandwidth and running the codecs and encoding and decoding and handling those capabilities. By the time Lync 2010 came out, we were seeing 8 to 16 core servers as kind of the standard deployment model. With Lync 2013, right, we're now seeing servers starting at around 32 cores and growing more. And so as we have more processing power available on a standard server backend infrastructure, we can run more of these Lync services on the same physical box or in the Windows Server 2012 or newer versions of other hypervisors, all of those roles on a virtual platform because we have more actual cores available to the guest. And so as a result, as we've added processor capacity, we're able to further consolidate those roles and essentially simplify what that Lync deployment would look inside. So as we point out, right, we're moving as many services and workloads as possible to that front-end server. We've even offloaded some of the back-end capabilities from SQL to that front-end server as a result. We still require an edge server, for example, if you want to have that outside access coming inbound. Edge is our perimeter security device. It's not joined to the domain and does some pre-authorization, right, and ICE done-in-turn negotiation for clients coming inbound from an untrusted network. But from the inside perspective, we've merged essentially everything except for the group chat environment onto the front-end server. We still rely on Active Directory. If you need voicemail, we require the Exchange role, for example. If you want to have that optimal PowerPoint experience, you can use the WAC server role from the SharePoint side. And if you want to manage it right, we recommend System Center or a software management tool to watch and monitor your organization. But other than these ancillary roles, we no longer have that concept of breaking out AV pools and mediation server pools and other types of server roles inside of the organization. The goal is really to reduce the number of servers that you have to deploy to simplify your Lync deployment. With that, let's talk a little bit then about our high availability changes in story inside of Lync 2013 preview. So first of all, we mentioned the concept of kind of decoupling or moving that transient data from SQL off to the front end. We also have a change that we announced on the back end. Previously, the only way to have a resilient back end was to leverage SQL clustering. That required us to deploy a shared storage environment that required a change potentially in licensing on SQL and on Windows in order to deploy a SQL cluster, and it significantly increased the operational cost, the licensing cost, the hardware cost, right, in order to deploy this highly available back end. But at the end of the day, that highly available back end looked a lot like Exchange 2003. You had resiliency at the server level, but at the storage level, you still had a single point of failure. With Lync 2013, we only support, if you want to have resilience at the back end, SQL mirroring. And that looks a lot more, if you're familiar with Exchange, right, like the 2007 or 2010 model. Now you have the concept of 2 separate SQL servers, no shared storage. SQL is doing the replication using a technology called SQL mirroring, and you're able to fail over back and forth with that SQL mirroring experience from the Lync side as well. So we see that as a reduction in some of the complexity required around SQL clustering. We don't even support SQL clustering because we prefer that you not leverage a SQL cluster for Lync 2013. If you want the availability on the back end, use SQL mirroring, and we expect that you'll have both fewer operational problems as well as a lower cost essentially for deployment without requiring that shared storage process. The way this works is that we actually distribute the data and presence across 3 different servers in an Enterprise Edition front-end pool. So each user essentially has this concept of a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary front-end server that will handle their presence and dynamic state information. If their primary server goes down, they will automatically fail back to their secondary and eventually to their tertiary. Also, another change is if, for example, the back-end server infrastructure goes offline, so let's say that we deploy just a standalone SQL server, and that SQL server becomes unavailable. With Lync 2010 and prior, or with Lync 2010, that resulted in the degraded user experience, right? We were no longer able to show things such as presence or availability because we didn't have access to that data that was stored in SQL. With OCS and prior, we didn't even have degraded availability. We were completely down when that SQL infrastructure was down. With Lync 2013, as we've offloaded that dynamic information to the front ends, so with Lync 2010, we offloaded registration. With Lync 2013, we're offloading this concept of presence. We now can withstand a loss of our back-end infrastructure for a period of time. And so if our back-end SQL server, single server fails, we will continue to cache things like buddy list changes and call forwarding settings, for example, on the front-end servers until that SQL server is restored. And so because we have that caching capability, we're able to operate or essentially run as normal, right, from an end-user perspective without exposing the fact that our permanent storage repository is down on the back end. We don't recommend running in that degraded state for more than a few days, right? Obviously, you're at risk then of, if the front ends also crash, you'd lose that cached information. We wouldn't be able to eventually publish it to SQL, and we would lose those contact list changes and other attributes like that. But essentially, the front ends will cache that information, and once a minute or so, they will write that information back to the SQL backend. This reduces our storage I/O and load on SQL, and therefore improves our overall performance, as well as buys us an additional layer or additional level of availability for the organization. So looking at that, right, if we have a Lync 2010 pool, we were very reliant on that concept of our back-end infrastructure. We required, and the only option you had to make that available, right, was SQL clustering. With Lync 2013, we now have the concept of spreading out that load across the front-end servers, handling all dynamic changes at the front-end layer alone, and handling those longer-term or static changes at the front end, caching it, and then submitting those in an asynchronous process back to the SQL backend over time to ensure that that's available in there in case one of the front ends goes down or we lose one of the front ends in that pool, for example. And as we point out, right, that concept of the front-end pools, we're still not sure what that eventual supported guidance will be, but we know what will be larger than what you had with Lync Server 2010. So we mentioned a little bit about this concept of user groups. This is something that happens automatically. You do not need to define anything at the administrator level. We just define this concept of user groups across the front-end servers in the pool, and we randomly place users on these different user groups. So each user has a preferred order, right, primary, secondary, and tertiary, of servers that will handle their dynamic and static changes. If that preferred server is available, they will register against it and use it to perform their presence updates and awareness updates, as well as any contact list changes. The information, such as the static information, such as contact list changes, is replicated synchronously. And that ensures that if a user makes a change, all three of those servers will record the change before we report it back successfully to the end user or the client, to ensure that in case that first server crashes shortly after the change, all three servers in that user group will have that state change. At a certain point after that change has occurred, we will then asynchronously write that change back to the SQL backend and ensure that that change is then captured permanently for the future in case the user comes back or logs in, or we lose all three of the front ends, for example, that has that user state changes. So essentially, this process of managing the dynamic and the static content changes occurs on the front end. It's a dynamic process that you're not having to administer or operate, but we wanted you to have some awareness of how that works so you have that understanding. So like we said, right, there's a pool backend. When the pool backend fails, users will continue to make those dynamic changes and static changes against their primary server, which will then replicate the static changes synchronously to the other front ends in that user group. If that front end server were to crash, user will automatically switch to their secondary server and continue to operate as normal with no awareness that the back-end server has failed and their primary server in that pool has failed as well. Our goal here is really to kind of simplify the concept of availability and disassociate that from any scripting or administrative level actions you may need to take in order to maintain that the service level availability of providing instant messaging, conferencing, and enterprise voice, for example. So this HA change, we feel, will enhance significantly the capabilities that we had around Lync Server 2010, where we required that back-end SQL infrastructure to be available for things such as instant messaging and conferencing. Finally, there's the secured by design. One of the concepts or tenets at Microsoft since the early part of the 2000s has been to focus on security. We learned our lesson right in the early 2000s as Windows XP began to get hit by a lot of malware. We actually stopped development for a period of time. Every developer had to go through a trustworthy computing and secure computing re-education in class to ensure that they're using the most relevant and up-to-date coding practices to ensure they're writing secure code. At this point, right, for Lync, all connections are secure. We never transmit data in the clear text. This comes with some overhead, right? We require certificates to be deployed on all of the server infrastructure in your environment. But as a result of that, we have less likelihood of having insecure data or clear text data transmitting the network where it could be sniffed out or interpreted by a malicious user on the network. Because we leverage Active Directory for authentication and use protocols such as NTLM v2 and Kerberos, we also restrict that capability of the common password attacks or having some passwords, for example, stored in Lync, right? We have a secure process for identity, access, control, and authorization, and we leverage that as part of the Lync environment to reduce this concept of having user IDs and passwords stored in different systems with different hash values and whether there's salt added and other aspects like that are required in a secure identity solution. Additionally, we have the concept of throttling. That ensures that we can reduce or minimize the threat of a denial of service attack. So by throttling both connections and responses from a server level to a client, we're able to minimize some of the common attack vectors that are out there from a secure perspective. We mentioned the high availability changes. We've also have some changes around site resilience. With Lync 2010, we had the concept of pool level failover, but that only applied to the enterprise voice workload. If you wanted to fail over instant messaging and conferencing, you had to export that data to a file, copy it to the other location or the other pool, and then during the failure, import that data into that other pool or location. With Lync Server 2013, that site resilience is built into the product. As we said, right, it was common for a lot of organizations to script that site resilience capability. With 2013, we now have automatic site failover for IM and presence, for conferencing, and the same core aspects of enterprise voice that we had in Lync Server 2010. And so not only will we provide the high availability inside of the pool level, but we will also provide automatic site resilience at the pool level if you want to extend that capability for resilience across locations or even to two different pools at the same location. Our goal there is to provide as many endpoints as possible to service those clients or end user requests and expect the normal failures to occur. For example, you'll have a traditional failure every Patch Tuesday, right? We want that patch process to be automatic. We don't want to see a degradation of service as you go through that normal patching. Additionally, you'll see randomly throughout the course of the life cycle of a deployment the concept of hardware failures. And those hardware failures should not, again, take down the concept of your communications infrastructure. And periodically, organizations are subject to site failures. Sometimes that's a power loss. Sometimes it's a severed network connection, right? The goal there with the concept of site recovery is we want that process of recovering to a second location to be as automatic and painless as possible from an administrator perspective. And so the more effort that we put into this concept of both high availability and site resiliency enables us essentially to ensure that the Lync service stays up and is reliable as those normal and routine failures take place inside of the organization. Some of this has come from, as Scott had mentioned earlier, right, the concept of us running Lync as a service in Office 365. We realized some of the difficulty, right, around providing high levels of service availability and ensuring that the service stays up even when these routine failures occur. The interesting side note around that is one of the big changes around the product groups and why you're seeing significant changes around availability and site resilience is that the developers, starting a couple of years back, went on call for service outages, right? And so by putting them responsible for what happens when the code base fails or a component fails, right, they're getting that 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. wake-up call. And there was a lot of protests at first, right, because it obviously can interrupt a working habit, but it also drove a realization that that's painful not just for us, but that also means it's painful for anyone running our software. And if they wanted those phone calls to reduce over time, they had to put the coding effort in to ensure that that availability is there in the product that they're working on. And so the less their component or their feature went down, the less likely they would be to get the call. And as a result, we saw a lot more collaboration across the teams to ensure that the concept of HA and site resilience is something that's really native or baked into the code base and not something that's going to rely on a monitoring tool or solution to detect that there's a problem, notify someone, and have that person then take action. Server virtualization is another area that's been a common customer feedback request, right? We had some limitations around core counts, for example. In Lync Server 2010, we only supported up to 4 cores, for example, for Lync guests running on a supported hypervisor. With Lync Server 2013, we're supporting as many cores as you can deploy on the hypervisors. I believe I just saw an email. I think Windows Server 2012 has RTM'd today. Was it? I think like a couple of hours ago. So Windows Server 2012 has increased the number of cores that you can run as guests. That allows us essentially to have more processing power, right? That enables us to deploy essentially more virtual Lync environments versus pure physical Lync environments. We also support the concept of mixing and matching. There's been some confusion as to, can you have a virtualized front-end pool, but the SQL be physical? Can you have a virtual SQL, but physical front-end servers, right? So we have the capability or the support policy now for Lync Server 2013 to allow that mixing and matching. Not all roles are required to be pure physical or pure virtual. We support the capability of kind of mixing up that physical and virtual capability on your workloads itself. We are working continually with the Windows Server 2012 team around features such as dynamic memory and some of the other changes around virtualization. Those changes will be coming, guidance will be coming on those changes over time. There is a white paper out on virtualization for Lync Server 2010. The principles in that white paper apply for virtualizing Lync Server 2013. And we'll provide updated guidance as we get closer to RTM around what specific features around hypervisors and platforms will be supported as we move to Lync Server 2013. The other aspect where we are happy to announce changes is around VDI. We've seen a lot of customers request the capability to do not just a VDI infrastructure for IAM and presence, but to enable things such as audio and video in a VDI scenario. With Lync Server 2013, we now have that capability. I think if I click the button, we get the supported features for VDI, and we can see that that's significantly more than we had in Lync Server 2010. The way we achieve this is we have a ability essentially to put a plugin on your VDI infrastructure that will redirect the audio and video from that VDI terminal to the specific destination, right? So we can now do peer-to-peer audio or video calls with a VDI environment versus having that audio and video go back to our VDI host server, which would increase the CPU and bandwidth requirements that that VDI host server would have. And so the more we can offload that peer-to-peer video and or MCU traffic, for example, right, from that VDI host and have it go directly from the client or the terminal back to an MCU or back to that peer in the call, the more users we're able to support effectively in a VDI type environment. So we have the core architectural changes for Lync. The next couple of slides will walk us quickly through the operations, management, and reporting capabilities that we have. How much time here? Yeah, we're at time, so I'll try to go through as quickly as possible. Operations, right? The goal here is to reduce deployment cost. I summarized the high points of this. We've really done some work to consolidate all of the management around Lync Server Control Panel, the planning wizard, and topology builder. So now things such as mobility, IPv6 support, configuring or pointing to your WAC servers, for example, right? Setting up persistent chat will all occur in the same interface that you become accustomed to for Lync Server 2010. So fewer administrative tools and management interfaces around that. The other big change is support for custom roles in RBAC. This was something we didn't have in Lync Server 2010, but this allows you to apply more granular or fine-tuned controls around who has permissions to which components and which services. We mentioned also the quick concept, right, around the concept of a response group administrator, for example, to help delegate some of those tasks from the core Lync administrator in the environment. We know the benefits to Active Directory. I won't spend a lot of time talking about that as we're pushed for time, but single directory platform, all of our access control and authorization is stored there inside of AD. Same support for central forest, right? Single forest, multi-service deployments with Active Directory and Lync Server 2013. Migration, we're going to cover more detail on migration in tomorrow's deployment session. That's going to give us an idea of what the process is. High level, it's the same process or similar process to in the past. You'll deploy a new Lync Server 2013 pool. You'll move users from their existing OCS 2007 R2 pool or their existing Lync Server 2010 pool onto Lync Server 2013. You'll be able to move them back and forth. One of the key changes is we now offer the capability of deploying either the server first or the client first. The Lync 2013 client is the first one that works against Lync 2010 or Lync 2013. And so you're no longer required to do the server deployment first, followed by a client upgrade. You have some flexibility as to whether you want to deploy the client first, the server first, or both in parallel, essentially, due to that increased client support. Come on. And it shows separate pool added, right? Move users from one pool to the other, and that capability exists. Our monitoring and our call detail records server, essentially. So when we say monitoring in Lync, what we're really referring to here is capturing statistics on our Lync environment. So we've added statistics, for example, around web conferencing and screen sharing that we didn't have in Lync Server 2010, but these call detail records are very verbose. We've also increased our default reports around monitoring to help you do troubleshooting. Our guidance really is that the call detail record server helps you understand what's happening with all of these calls across the network, so you can see areas where network links are overloaded, a wireless hotspot, for example, has too many guests or connections, or other aspects at the physical network, at the client level, at the hardware level, that might be triggering poor audio quality or a poor Lync end user experience. So the monitoring server is our role that helps you pick that up by capturing all those statistics or call detail records for all those Lync communications that are occurring in the environment. As we mentioned also, right, the other change for monitoring is that we no longer have a separate monitoring or reporting server. Monitoring and reporting has also been consolidated back to the front end. So there's one less reason to not deploy monitoring now. Now it's just a checkbox for the front end. We can store that data in SQL and have it available for you for troubleshooting or reporting back to a business on use of the Lync server environment in your organization. One of the other areas of collaboration between products is something around the compliance and contact store experience. Lync now can leverage either SQL or Exchange as your storage repository for things like archiving and compliance. With Exchange Server 2013, there's the new Discovery Center portal, which allows you to go through and perform compliance requests across Exchange, Lync, and SharePoint. So if you have the current version of Exchange, right, you have that option. If you don't have the current version of Exchange, we still allow you to export your compliance data or have your compliance data from Lync flow into SQL and have that be the repository until you're able to upgrade to Exchange 2010. But goal here, right, is you have a single location for archiving, a single location to go to for compliance, one contact store in the organization. We can leverage just your Exchange contacts so you don't have that separate concept around Lync, and one call detail record database. By reducing the duplication of these systems in your environment, our goal is to try to simplify the administrative and operational aspects for users running it. The main architectural change is we have something called the Lync storage subsystem. This essentially abstracts the capturing of that archiving data, such as conversation history, right, or an IM that's occurred, before it's submitted off to that storage, the back-end storage solution. So first it goes through LSS, or our Lync storage subsystem. Lync storage subsystem then makes the determination of, do you have Exchange 2013 configured, and should I use that? Or do you have a SQL archiving backend, and should I use that? And so by abstracting the storage from the front end, or having it write directly right to that backend storage system, by having it first go through the Lync storage subsystem, we're able to make that choice very effectively in software of which final repository do we want that Lync archiving data to be stored in on the back-end system. Finally, Paul talked this morning about Skype, right? So there's some federation changes. Not only have we announced support for instant messaging and audio federation with Skype, we've also made a change around our XMPP gateway. Previously, if you wanted to federate with Google Talk or Jabber or any other XMPP-based systems, you had to deploy a separate OCS or Lync server role, the XMPP gateway. With Lync Server 2013, the XMPP capability is added to the edge itself. So we no longer require a separate server infrastructure for XMPP federation. You now have one platform for federation, Lync server, or the Lync Edge server, and that server can handle both SIP federation requests, so AOL, Yahoo, Windows Live Messenger, for example, other organizations running OCS or Lync, as well as XMPP providers such as Google Talk or Jabber or other systems that are based on XMPP. So our federation story has become simpler due to the consolidation of multiple protocols at the edge layer, which ensures that you have the capability for augmenting or extending your Lync platform to these other providers. And as well the Silk product, for example, that Skype leverages for its protocols and communication. Almost final slide. The last one, we mentioned early on the concept of hybrid. And specifically what we're referring to here is the ability now in Lync to split a single domain or namespace, SIP namespace. So if you have @contoso.com, some users can be in Office 365, some users can be in the on-prem environment. You pick which users are where and which functionality is lit up for each. That allows you to gradually move users to the cloud versus a all-in or nothing approach, which we have had in the past or some other organizations have, and gives you more flexibility around that concept of moving portions of users, like we said, other subsidiaries or a subset of your user base to a cloud-type model. So with that, I tried to rush through as quickly as I could. I think we're now only 5 minutes over. We wanted to give you the quick bullet list of the architectural changes in Lync. Coming up tomorrow morning, we'll go over deployment and migration. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll talk about the voice features and all the voice changes, enterprise voice changes around Lync. Friday morning, we will cover the conferencing changes, so the meeting experience changes. We're actually going to have Polycom here to show you not just the Lync native features and capabilities, but also the integration with third parties for room systems or other endpoints that might be non-Microsoft or non-Lync endpoints that can register or talk to Lync. And then finally, Friday afternoon, we'll talk about the what we call enterprise networking and the changes to Lync around quality of service and differences around some of the advanced network capabilities you have and how Lync can take advantage of those. So thank you for being patient. We do have another remote control card to give away. And I had an idea for this one, and now I forgot it. I was thinking back when Scott missed his, I'm like, I need to come up with some ideas. And I had the large mailbox support in exchange. You got any ideas, Scott? I know, because we're pushed for time on the hour sessions. It's hard to... Closest, there you go, that's a good one. Closest to 3,000. Who's closest to 3,000?
No, just kidding.
I have 2,999. 3130. Anyone closer than 3130? Higher, closest to 3,000. Higher or lower? There we go. 3,130. You're a lucky winner. One more.
So I'll pick mine. So let's say closest to 1567.
That's going to be hard math to do. You ready? You want to start plugging in, Scott? You ready? Pardon?